A foster kid saved a stray dog. This simple act of kindness was all it took to set in motion events that would change his life forever, though he never could have known it would reunite him with his birth mother. Rain pelted against the window of the group home, the rhythm matching the hollow feeling in Marcus Wright's chest. 16 years old with eyes that had seen too much, he sat on the edge of his narrow bed, a worn duffel bag at his feet. Another move, another group home, another set of faces he'd have to memorize only to forget in a few months' time. "Marcus, you ready?" Mrs. Keller, his social worker, stood in the doorway. Her voice was kind but tired, the sound of someone who carried too many children's futures in her overflowing case files. He nodded, not trusting his voice. 6 homes in 4 years had taught him to pack light, speak less, and expect nothing. The weight of constant displacement had settled into his bones like an old friend. Outside, the rain had turned the world gray. Marcus stared out the passenger window of Mrs. Keller's sedan, watching raindrops race down the glass. Each drop chasing another, merging, disappearing. Like people in his life. "The Richardsons are good people," Mrs. Keller said, breaking the silence. "They've been fostering for 15 years. They have 2 other kids right now, both younger." Marcus didn't respond. He'd heard variations of this speech before. Good people, nice home, fresh start. The words had lost their meaning somewhere between his 3rd and 4th placement. The Richardson house sat on a quiet street in Portland, a 2-story craftsman with blue shutters and a covered porch, where a middle-aged couple waited, forced smiles plastered on nervous faces. Marcus recognized the look, the hopeful apprehension of people who wanted to do good, but weren't entirely sure what they were getting into. Susan Richardson had warm hands and a voice that matched. Her husband Tom's handshake was firm but gentle. Their home smelled of cinnamon and laundry detergent. Marcus cataloged these details mechanically, knowing better than to let them matter. His room was upstairs, small but private, a luxury in the foster system. A twin bed with a blue comforter, a desk, a dresser, a window overlooking the backyard. "We'll let you get settled," Susan said, hovering in the doorway. "Dinner's at 6. When they left, Marcus sat on the edge of the bed, not unpacking. His body in the room, his mind elsewhere. Somewhere years back, before his mother disappeared into her addictions. Before the state decided she couldn't care for him. Before he became a case number in a file. He pulled out the only photograph he had of her. Creased and faded from too many moves, too many fingers. Her smile bright, her arms around a 7-year-old version of himself. The Marcus in the photo didn't know what was coming. On his 3rd night at the Richardson house, unable to sleep, Marcus slipped out his window onto the sloped roof of the back porch. The September air carried the first hints of autumn's chill, but the sky was clear for the first time since his arrival. Stars scattered like salt across black velvet. That's when he heard it, a low whimper coming from beyond the fence that bordered the yard. Then again, more desperate this time. Marcus hesitated, then climbed down using the trellis that ran up the side of the house. The wet grass soaked through his socks as he crossed the yard. Sound led him to a narrow gap between 2 fence posts. In the dim light spilling from a distant street lamp, he saw a dog, thin, matted and trembling, its leg caught in a tangle of discarded wire. The animal's eyes, amber and frightened, locked onto Marcus. "Hey," he whispered, crouching low. "Hey there." The dog growled softly, a warning without conviction. It was too exhausted for real threat. "I'm not gonna hurt you," Marcus said, inching closer. His heart pounded against his ribs. "We're kind of the same, you know. Nobody looking for either of us." The dog watched him, wary but desperate. Slowly, Marcus reached out, let the animal smell his hand. The wet nose touched his fingers, a tentative trust. It took 20 minutes of gentle coaxing and careful maneuvering to free the dog's leg from the wire. The animal was all bones beneath matted golden brown fur. No collar, no tags, just frightened eyes and a hesitant tail that gave a single grateful wag once freed. "You can't stay here," Marcus whispered, looking back at the dark house. The Richardsons seemed nice enough, but they hadn't signed up for a stray dog. Adding complications was the fastest way to get reshuffled in the system. Marcus knew this from experience. The dog made the decision for him, pressing its thin body against his legs, shivering. Something broke open inside Marcus's chest, a feeling he'd locked away long ago. Before he could reconsider, he was guiding the dog toward the trellis, then helping it through his window. In the bathroom, with the door locked and the shower running to mask the sound, Marcus cleaned the dog as best he could with hand towels and soap. The animal stood still throughout, as if understanding the need for silence. The wound on its leg wasn't deep, but it was dirty. Marcus cleaned it carefully, whispering reassurances. We'll figure something out tomorrow, he promised, though he had no plan beyond the night. Just stay quiet, okay? That night, the dog slept curled against Marcus's side, its thin body gradually relaxing as it succumbed to what was likely its first safe sleep in a long time. Marcus lay awake, one hand resting on the coarse fur, feeling the steady rise and fall of the dog's breathing. For the first time in years, he wasn't alone in the dark. Morning brought reality and harsh relief. Marcus couldn't hide a dog indefinitely, especially one that needed food, care, and eventually a trip to the vet. The wound on its leg wasn't life-threatening, but the animal was severely undernourished. He smuggled the dog into the backyard before the house woke up, promising to return with food. At breakfast, he pocketed half his toast and a strip of bacon, avoiding Susan's gaze. Sleep okay? Tom asked, lowering his newspaper. Marcus nodded, the lie easy after years of practice. Fine, thanks. Mrs. Keller mentioned you're starting at Lincoln High on Monday, Susan said, refilling his orange juice without asking. These small kindnesses always unnerved him, unexpected and therefore suspicious. I thought we could go shopping for some school supplies this weekend. Whatever's easiest, Marcus replied, his mind on the dog waiting in the yard. After breakfast, he slipped outside with his smuggled food and a bowl of water. The dog waited exactly where he'd left it, behind the garden shed where it couldn't be seen from the house. Sorry, it's not much, Marcus said, placing the food before the hungry animal. The dog ate delicately despite its obvious hunger, another survivor who knew to savor what little came its way. While the dog ate, Marcus examined it more carefully in the daylight. Despite its condition, he could see it was young, maybe a year old, with golden brown fur that might be beautiful when clean and healthy. Some kind of retriever mix. You need a name, Marcus said, surprising himself. Naming meant keeping, and keeping wasn't an option. Still, the word came to him without effort. Chance. What do you think? The dog Chance looked up from the empty plate and licked Marcus's hand, a gesture so gentle it made his throat tighten. For the next 3 days, Marcus established a precarious routine. He snuck food to Chance, spent every free moment in the backyard, and slept with his window open so the dog could hear his voice during the night. He knew it couldn't last, but every day without discovery felt like a victory. On the 4th day, his luck ran out. Marcus returned from helping Tom with groceries to find Susan in the backyard, Chance sitting obediently at her feet while she stroked his head. The bottom dropped out of Marcus's world. He started, excuses crowding his tongue, none making it past his lips. Susan looked up, her expression unreadable. He was whining by the back door. Smart boy knew that's where the food comes from. Marcus waited for the anger, the disappointment, the lecture about breaking rules and betraying trust. His muscles tensed, preparing for the familiar sequence: confrontation, punishment, removal. Instead, Susan smiled. He's very polite for a stray. Sat right down when I told him to. Marcus stood frozen, unable to process this response. How long have you been hiding him? She asked, her voice curious rather than accusatory. 4 days, Marcus admitted. I found him caught in some wire. He was hurt. Susan nodded, examining Chance's leg where the wound was healing. You cleaned this up nicely. She looked at Marcus. Really looked at him, seeming to see something beyond the guarded foster kid who'd arrived a week ago. Why didn't you tell us? The truth spilled out before he could filter it. New kid bringing problems gets sent back. Something shifted in Susan's eyes, a flicker of hurt followed by understanding. Marcus, is that what you think would happen? That we'd send you away over a dog? He shrugged, not trusting words. In his experience, foster homes had breaking points. It was just a matter of finding them. Susan sighed, still petting Chance. Tom and I need to talk about this. But first, this fellow needs a proper vet visit. His name is Chance, Marcus said quietly. Chance, Susan repeated, smiling. Fitting. 2 hours later, Marcus sat in a veterinary office, Chance leaning against his legs. Tom had driven them without complaint, had even paid for the visit without hesitation. The disconnect between what Marcus expected and what was happening left him disoriented. He's malnourished but otherwise healthy. The vet, Dr. Shen, explained. No microchip, no collar. Given his condition, he's been on his own for a while. She smiled at Marcus. You did a good job cleaning that wound. It's healing nicely. Pride flickered in Marcus's chest, unfamiliar and warm. We'll need to report him as found. Dr. Chen continued. But if no one claims him after the required holding period, he could be yours. With your parents' permission, of course. They're not, Marcus began. We're his foster family. Tom interjected smoothly. And we'll need to discuss the possibility of adding a dog to our household. But, he added, looking at Marcus, I think Chance here has already made a strong case for himself. That evening, after Chance had been fed proper dog food, bathed thoroughly, and outfitted with a temporary collar, the Richardsons sat Marcus down at the kitchen table. His stomach knotted, old instincts surfacing. This was it, the moment when it all fell apart. We've been talking, Susan began, her hands folded on the table. About Chance. Marcus nodded, eyes fixed on a knot in the wooden tabletop. Keeping a dog is a big responsibility, Tom said. There's food, vet bills, training, daily care. I'll do everything, Marcus said quickly. You won't have to. Susan's hand covered his, stopping the desperate flow of words. Marcus, we're not saying no. We're saying this needs to be a family decision because Chance would be joining our family, just like you have. The comparison struck him silent. We're willing to let Chance stay, Tom continued, but we need to know you're committed to caring for him. This isn't temporary. Dogs can live 15 years or more. The unspoken question hung in the air. Would Marcus still be here in 15 days, let alone 15 years? I understand if you can't promise that, Marcus said quietly. No one can, least of all a foster kid who'd never stayed anywhere longer than 8 months. Susan and Tom exchanged a look, one of those married people conversations that happened without words. How about this? Susan finally said. We'll agree to keep Chance while you're with us. If, she emphasized the word, for any reason things change, we promise he'll either go with you or stay with us. He won't end up back on the streets or in a shelter. It was more than Marcus had dared hope for. Thank you. He managed, the words inadequate for the relief flooding through him. There's one condition, Tom added, his expression serious. No more secrets. Not about Chance, not about anything else. This house only works if we're honest with each other. Marcus nodded, though the promise terrified him. Honesty was dangerous. Secrets were armor. That night, Chance slept on a proper dog bed beside Marcus's bed. Though by morning, he'd migrated up onto the mattress, his head resting on Marcus's chest. For the first time in years, Marcus had slept through the night without waking. School started the following Monday. Marcus walked the halls of Lincoln High with the same defensive posture he'd perfected at his previous 3 schools. Eyes watchful, shoulders slightly hunched, path calculated to avoid crowded areas. New kid in September of junior year. Target painted on his back. Hey, new kid. The voice came from behind him as he wrestled with his assigned locker. Marcus tensed but didn't turn. Your combination not working? A girl moved into his peripheral vision, short with purple-tipped dark hair and more confidence than anyone had a right to possess in high school. I'm fine, Marcus said, jaw tight. No, you're not. These lockers are ancient. You have to lift up while you turn the dial or it sticks. She demonstrated on the locker next to his, the metal door swinging open effortlessly. I'm Danny, Resident Welcome Committee for Strays and Transfers. The word stray hit too close to home. Marcus finally looked at her directly. I'm not a charity case. Danny raised her eyebrows. Did I say you were? I'm fulfilling my court-mandated community service hours by helping the guidance office. Trust me, there's no charity happening here. Despite himself, Marcus felt the corner of his mouth twitch. He tried his locker again, lifting as instructed. It opened. See? Magic. Danny leaned against the neighboring locker. So what's your story, new kid? Marcus, he corrected. And no story. Everyone has a story, she countered. Mine involves a misunderstanding about some creative redistribution of test answers last year. She grinned, unrepentant. Hence the community service. Marcus stuffed his backpack into the locker, taking only what he needed for his first 2 classes. Foster kid, moved around. End of story. He expected her to retreat, uncomfortable with his bluntness. Instead, she nodded. Concise. I appreciate that. Most people ramble. Before he could respond, the bell rang. Danny pushed off from the locker. What's your first class? English. Hamilton. Down the hall, 3rd door on the left. She likes participation but hates brown-nosing. Find the balance and you'll be fine. She walked backward as she spoke. Cafeteria's a war zone. Meet me by the music room at lunch if you want peace. Then she was gone, swallowed by the surge of students rushing to class. Marcus stood for a moment, oddly disoriented. He couldn't remember the last time someone his age had spoken to him without ulterior motives or obligatory politeness. The day passed in a blur of new faces, class syllabi, and the particular exhaustion that came from navigating unfamiliar social territories. When lunch arrived, Marcus found himself hesitating between the crowded cafeteria in Danny's invitation. The music room corridor was quieter, populated by a handful of students eating while practicing instruments or reviewing sheet music. Danny sat on the floor back against the wall, a container of pasta salad balanced on her knees. "You came," she said, sounding genuinely surprised. Most people prefer the social bloodbath of the cafeteria. Marcus slid down the wall to sit beside her, unwrapping the sandwich Susan had packed him that morning. Not big on crowds. A man of few words. "I can work with that." She offered him a bite of her pasta salad. When he hesitated, she rolled her eyes. "I don't have cooties, promise." The easy camaraderie was foreign but not unwelcome. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before Danny spoke again. "So foster kid who moved around. That's the headline." "Huh, what's the fine print?" Marcus focused on his sandwich. "Huh, why do you care?" "Because I'm nosy," she admitted without shame. "And because you look like someone who could use a friend who asks direct questions instead of tiptoeing around you like you might shatter." The assessment was so accurate it left Marcus momentarily speechless. He'd spent years being treated like either a problem to solve or a tragedy to pity. "I've been in the system since I was 9, he finally said. "My mom couldn't stay clean. Dad was never in the picture." "That sucks," Danny said simply, neither dismissing nor dramatizing his circumstances. "Yeah," Marcus took another bite of his sandwich. "Been with the Richardsons for a week and a half. They seem decent." Portland's full of well-meaning white liberals desperate to save the world one foster kid at a time, Danny observed, though there was no real bite to her words. But decent is better than the alternative. Marcus found himself telling her about Chance, how he'd found him, hidden him, and eventually been caught. How the Richardsons had surprised him by not only allowing the dog to stay, but taking him to the vet and buying proper supplies. "Okay, that bumps them up from decent to pretty cool," Danny conceded. Not many foster parents would take on a mystery mutt. "He's not a mutt," Marcus defended reflexively. "Doctor, Chen thinks he's mostly golden retriever, maybe some collie." Danny grinned. "Listen to you, all-protective dog, Dad. Got a picture?" Marcus hesitated, then pulled out his phone. Another surprise from the Richardsons, who'd added him to their family plan without fanfare, and showed her the single photo he'd taken of Chance sprawled on his bed, looking infinitely more content than the frightened stray he'd rescued. "He's gorgeous," Danny said, examining the photo. "Even with the tragic haircut the vet probably gave him. They had to shave some parts to treat the matting." Marcus explained, surprised by how easily conversation flowed when it centered on Chance rather than himself. When the warning bell rang, Danny handed back his phone. "Same time tomorrow? I want updates on the dog's recovery." It wasn't until Marcus was halfway to his next class that he realized he'd made a friend. His first in, longer than he could remember. The following weeks established a rhythm Marcus hadn't experienced in years. Mornings began with Chance's enthusiastic wake-up routine. A cold nose pressed to Marcus's cheek, followed by patient waiting at the bedroom door to be let out. Evenings included walks around the neighborhood, Chance's health improving visibly with each passing day. At school, lunch with Danny became a fixture, their friendship growing through shared cynicism and her inexhaustible curiosity about Chance's progress. She invited herself over one Friday afternoon, promptly winning both the Richardsons' approval and Chance's devoted attention. "He's a terrible guard dog," Marcus complained as Chance rolled over for Danny to scratch his belly, now filling out nicely after weeks of proper nutrition. "He's perfect," Danny countered, laughing as the dog's leg twitched in ecstasy. "You, however, are being summoned." She nodded toward the kitchen where Susan stood in the doorway. "Marcus, can we talk for a minute?" Susan's expression was unreadable, sending a spike of anxiety through him. In the kitchen, Tom sat at the table, a folder open before him. Marcus's heart rate accelerated. Folders meant paperwork. Paperwork meant changes. "Everything okay?" he asked, aiming for casual and missing by a mile. "We just got off the phone with Mrs. Keller," Tom began. "Your 3-month review is coming up next week." Marcus nodded stiffly. The quarterly evaluation that determined whether a placement continued or ended. He'd been through enough to know the drill. "We wanted to discuss something with you before then," Susan continued, gesturing for him to sit. "As you know, foster placements are temporary by design. But sometimes when things are working well," she looked at Tom, who nodded encouragingly. "Sometimes families decide to make things more permanent." Marcus sat very still, afraid to interpret her words in case he was wrong. "What Susan's trying to say," Tom took over, "is that we'd like to discuss the possibility of adoption." The word hung in the air between them. Marcus stared, certain he'd misheard. "You want to adopt me?" His voice came out smaller than intended. If that's something you would want, Susan clarified quickly. We've grown very fond of you, Marcus, and we think you've been settling in well here. But Marcus struggled to find words. You've only known me for 3 months. Tom smiled. Sometimes you just know when something is right. He glanced toward the living room where Chance's delighted barks mingled with Danny's laughter. You knew pretty quickly with him, didn't you? The comparison silenced Marcus's objections. He had known, had felt that connection to Chance instantly, had been willing to risk his placement to protect the dog. You don't have to answer now, Susan assured him. We just wanted you to know we're talking with Mrs. Keller about beginning the process, if you're open to it. Marcus nodded, unable to form words around the tightness in his throat. Think about it, Tom said gently. Talk to Danny if that helps. Just know the offer is genuine and it doesn't expire. Later that night, after Danny had gone home and the house had grown quiet, Marcus sat on his bed with Chance's head in his lap. The dog sensed his emotional turmoil, staying closer than usual, offering silent comfort. Adoption. The word he'd stopped hoping for years ago. The Richardsons wanted to make him permanently part of their family, not out of obligation or pity, but because they wanted him. The concept was so foreign it felt dangerous to believe. What do you think, Chance? He whispered, scratching behind the dog's ears. Should I say yes? Chance looked up at him with absolute trust, a look that said home wasn't a place but a feeling of belonging, of safety. Marcus fell asleep that night with one hand resting on Chance's back, dreaming for the first time in years of a future rather than the past. The next morning dawned crisp and bright, a perfect October Saturday. Marcus took Chance for an early walk, their route now a familiar loop through the neighborhood and into the small park 3 blocks over. The dog trotted beside him, his gait strong and even, no trace remaining of the injury that had first brought them together. Morning, Marcus. Chance, Mrs. Abernathy called from her garden. The elderly neighbor had become one of their regular encounters, always ready with a dog biscuit kept specifically for Chance. Morning, Mrs. Ari Estontusin, Marcus called back, pausing to let Chance receive his treat with gentle manners that never failed to delight the old woman. He's looking handsome today, she observed, patting the dog's head. That coat's coming in beautifully. Pride warmed Marcus's chest. Thanks. The vet says he's at his ideal weight now. Good care makes all the difference, Mrs. Abernathy said, her eyes twinkling. For dogs and people both. The simple exchange, being recognized, greeted by name, having his efforts acknowledged, struck Marcus with unexpected force. 3 months ago, he'd been a stranger here. Now he was becoming woven into the fabric of this place, this community. At the park, Marcus unclipped Chance's leash in the designated dog area. The transformation from scared, injured stray to confident, playful companion was remarkable. Chance bounded across the grass, pausing occasionally to check that Marcus was still watching, then resuming his joyful exploration. He's really something, came a voice from nearby. Marcus turned to find a woman seated on a bench at the edge of the dog area. She was perhaps in her early 40s, with dark hair pulled back in a loose ponytail and eyes that seemed vaguely familiar. Thanks, Marcus replied, habit keeping his response brief with strangers. Golden Retriever mix? She asked, watching Chance with unusual intensity. That's what the vet thinks. Maybe some collie too. The woman nodded. I had a dog like him once. Same color, same intelligent eyes. Her voice carried a wistful note that made Marcus look at her more carefully. Something about her profile tugged at his memory, but he couldn't place it. Perhaps she was another neighborhood regular he'd seen around. How long have you had him? She asked. About 3 months. Found him caught in some wire, brought him home. The simplified version had become his standard explanation. The woman smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. Lucky dog. Chance chose that moment to return to Marcus, shaking grass from his coat before noticing the stranger. He approached her cautiously, sniffing the air. May I? She asked, holding out her hand. Sure. He's friendly. Chance sniffed her outstretched fingers, then pressed his head against her hand with unexpected familiarity. The woman's breath caught, her fingers trembling slightly as they sank into his fur. Good boy, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Such a good, beautiful boy. The intensity of her reaction was strange, but Marcus had seen how people sometimes got emotional around dogs. Perhaps she'd recently lost her own pet. After a moment, she seemed to collect herself. Sorry. He just reminds me of someone I lost. It's okay, Marcus assured her. Chance has that effect on people. Chance, she repeated as if tasting the name. That's perfect. She looked up at Marcus then, really looked at him, and something in her expression shifted. A flash of recognition quickly masked. "Evening. You live in the neighborhood?" she asked, her voice carefully casual. "A few blocks that way," Marcus said, gesturing vaguely. Foster kid instincts kept him from being specific. "With my foster family." "Foster family?" she echoed softly. Her eyes never left his face. "Have you been with them long?" The personal questions from a stranger would normally have sent Marcus retreating, but something about the woman kept him anchored. "Few months. They're good people." She nodded, blinking rapidly. "I'm glad to hear that." She stood suddenly. "I should go. It was nice meeting you and Chance." Before Marcus could respond, she was walking away, her steps hurried. At the park entrance, she paused, looked back once with an expression Marcus couldn't decipher, then disappeared around the corner. "That was weird, right?" Marcus asked Chance, who was still staring after the woman. The dog whined softly. "Yeah, I thought so too." The incident faded from his mind as the day progressed. Back at the house, Marcus helped Tom with yard work while Chance supervised from a sunny spot on the grass. That evening, over dinner, Marcus finally found the courage to broach the subject they'd discussed the previous day. "I've been thinking about what you said. About adoption." Susan and Tom both stilled, giving him their full attention. "I'd like that," Marcus said simply. "If you're sure." The joy that bloomed across their faces was answer enough, but their words, promises of commitment, of family, of permanence, wrapped around Marcus like a shield against all the uncertainties that had defined his life for so long. Later, in bed with Chance curled beside him, Marcus allowed himself to believe, truly believe, that his life had changed irrevocably for the better. All because he'd helped a stray dog caught in wire one September night. The following weekend, the Richardsons celebrated the official start of the adoption process with a small gathering. Just the three of them, Chance, Danny, and Mrs. Keller, who'd brought paperwork but also cupcakes and genuine congratulations. "I told you they were keepers," Danny whispered to Marcus as they watched the adults discuss procedural details at the kitchen table. "You never said that," Marcus countered, unable to stop smiling. "Well, I thought it loudly," Danny insisted. "Same difference." The doorbell rang, cutting short their banter. "I'll get it," Marcus offered, Chance trotting at his heels. He opened the door to find the woman from the park standing on the porch, her hands twisted nervously together. Up close, the nagging sense of familiarity intensified. "Hi," she said, her voice unsteady. "I'm sorry to intrude. I saw you walking your dog earlier and followed you." She winced. "That sounds creepy." "I didn't mean..." "Who is it, Marcus?" Susan called from the kitchen. "Just a second." Marcus called back, confused by the woman's presence and apparent distress. "Do I know you?" The woman's eyes filled with tears. "You did. Once." She took a deep breath. "My name is Catherine Wright. I'm your mother." The world tilted beneath Marcus's feet. Behind him, he heard Susan approaching, then stopping abruptly. "Marcus?" Susan's voice seemed to come from very far away. Chance pressed against Marcus's legs, a warm anchor as he stared at the woman, at Catherine, searching her features for confirmation of her impossible claim. The eyes. That's what had seemed familiar at the park. They were his own eyes looking back at him. "I don't understand." He managed, his voice raw. "How did you find me?" Catherine's gaze dropped to Chance. Because of him. Inside, the celebration had gone silent. Tom and Mrs. Keller joined Susan in the entryway, witnessing the unfolding scene with varying degrees of concern and confusion. "Perhaps we should all sit down," Mrs. Keller suggested, her professional composure masking whatever shock she must be feeling. Minutes later, they gathered in the living room. The Richardsons on the sofa, Mrs. Keller in an armchair, Marcus and Catherine facing each other across the coffee table. Chance had positioned himself halfway between them, as if unable to choose a side. Catherine's hands trembled as she placed a faded photograph on the table. "Do you recognize this?" Marcus stared at the image. A much younger Catherine holding a golden retriever puppy, its fur the exact shade of Chance's. The date stamp in the corner read 2008. "This was Chance," Catherine said softly. "The first Chance." She looked at the dog now lying on the floor between them. "When I saw you with him at the park, I thought I was hallucinating. Same color, same white patch on the chest." "I don't understand," Marcus repeated, struggling to process what she was saying. Catherine took a shaky breath. "When you were 7, before things got bad, we had a dog named Chance. You loved him more than anything." Her voice broke. "When they took you away, he was given to my sister. I lost track of him after she moved away from Oregon. And you think this is the same dog? Tom asked gently, skepticism evident. Catherine shook her head. No, that's impossible. The original Chance would be ancient by now, if he's even still alive. But the resemblance. She looked at Marcus, tears spilling freely now. When I saw you together, something told me to follow. I just wanted to see your face up close to be sure. How can you be here? Marcus asked, his voice barely audible. The state said you were untraceable, that you'd left Oregon. I did leave, Catherine admitted. For a long time. I wasn't well, Marcus. The addiction took everything. She straightened her shoulders. I've been sober for 3 years now. I came back to Portland 6 months ago, started looking for you. The system wouldn't tell me anything because my parental rights had been terminated. Mrs. Keller nodded confirmation. That's standard procedure when a parent has been unlocatable for an extended period. I never stopped looking. Catherine insisted, her eyes fixed on Marcus. Never stopped loving you. I just had to get well first. Had to become someone worthy of finding you. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus felt suspended between past and present, between the mother he'd lost and the family he'd just committed to. What do you want? He finally asked, the question encompassing more than he could articulate. Catherine's answer came without hesitation. To know you're okay. To tell you I'm sorry. To explain if you'll let me. She glanced at the Richardsons. I'm not here to disrupt your life or the family you found. I just needed to see you. This is a lot to process, Susan said, her voice steady despite the shock evident on her face. Marcus, what do you need right now? The question pulled him back from the edge of overwhelming emotion. What did he need? The answer came with surprising clarity. I want to talk to her, he said. Alone, he glanced at Chance. With him, the adults exchanged looks. Tom nodded first. We'll be in the kitchen if you need us. As they filed out, Danny squeezed Marcus's shoulder in silent support before following them, closing the door to give the privacy he'd requested. When they were alone, Marcus couldn't find words. Catherine seemed equally lost, her eyes moving between him and Chance, as if connecting pieces of a puzzle only she could see. He found me, Marcus finally said, needing to fill the silence. 3 months ago, he was hurt, trapped in some wire behind the house. I snuck him in. A small smile touched Catherine's lips. You always had a soft spot for strays. The Richardsons let me keep him. Marcus hesitated, uncertain how to describe his foster parents to his birth mother. They're good people. I can see that, Catherine said softly. I'm grateful. Chance moved then, rising to place his head on Catherine's knee. She stroked his fur with reverent fingers. The original Chance was your birthday present, she said. Your 7th birthday before everything changed. You named him after a character in that book you loved, the one about the dog that saves his family. The memory surfaced slowly, a children's book read and reread until its pages wore thin. Chance of a lifetime, Marcus whispered. I'd forgotten. You'd read it to him every night, Catherine continued. Said he needed to know he was named after a hero. The detail unlocked something in Marcus, a floodgate of memories he'd suppressed for years. The apartment with the yellow kitchen, the dog bed beside his own, the sense of safety he'd felt with Chance beside him. When they took you, Catherine's voice caught. They wouldn't let me send Chance with you. Said the foster home couldn't take pets. My sister agreed to keep him until I got clean. But I didn't. Not for a long time. What happened to him? Marcus asked, needing to know. He lived with my sister until she moved to California. She couldn't keep him in her new place, so she found him a home with a family there. Catherine met his eyes directly. I failed both of you. The admission hung between them, raw and honest. Marcus felt the weight of years, of absence and loss, of questions without answers, pressing against his chest. Why now? He asked. After all this time? Because I promised myself that if I ever got clean, if I ever became someone you wouldn't be ashamed of, I would find you. Catherine's gaze was steady despite her tears. Even if just to say I'm sorry. Even if you wanted nothing to do with me. I used to wait for you, Marcus admitted, the words scraped from deep within. Every new foster home, I'd think maybe this time you'd come find me. I know, Catherine whispered. I know I broke your heart. There's no making up for that. Then what is this? Marcus gestured between them. What happens now? Catherine took a deep breath. That's entirely up to you. I'm not here to reclaim you or disrupt the life you're building. I thought you deserved to know I'm alive. That I got better. That I never stopped loving you. even when I couldn't show it. Chance moved then, crossing to rest his head on Marcus's lap as if sensing his turmoil. The gesture grounded him, reminded him of how far he'd come, from wounded, distrustful foster kid to someone capable of caring, of connecting, of building a future. "I'm being adopted," he said, the words both a declaration and a test. "The Richardsons, they're going to be my family. Legally." Catherine nodded, pain and acceptance mingling in her expression. "I'm glad. You deserve that stability, that commitment. But you're my mother," Marcus said, the contradiction pulling at him. "Biologically, at least." "Biology isn't everything," Catherine said gently. "Family is who shows up, who stays. The Richardsons showed up for you. I didn't. Not when it mattered most." The honesty of her self-assessment startled him. The mother he remembered had been consumed by denial, by the next fix, by promises as empty as the bottles she left behind. "I'd like to know you," Marcus said, surprising himself with the truth of it. "Not as my mother, maybe, but as someone who was part of my past, who might be part of my future somehow." Hope bloomed across Catherine's face, cautious but unmistakable. "I'd like that too, very much." Chance whined softly, looking between them. Marcus scratched his ears, drawing comfort from the dog's steady presence. "He really does look just like your Chance," Catherine observed. "Same soulful eyes." "Maybe it's not coincidence," Marcus said, only half joking. "Maybe he was meant to find me, to find us." Catherine's smile was sad but genuine. "I'd like to believe that." She reached out hesitantly, her hand stopping just short of touching Marcus's. "May I?" Marcus nodded, allowing her fingers to close around his. The first physical contact between them in 7 years. It wasn't the joyful reunion of movies, nor the bitter confrontation he'd sometimes imagined. It was simply a beginning, fragile, uncertain, but real. When they finally called the others back in, Marcus had made his request clear. Catherine explained it to the room. "Marcus and I would like to get to know each other again," she said, her voice steadier now. "Slowly and with your blessing." She addressed this last part to the Richardsons. "I understand you're becoming his legal family, and I respect that completely. I'm not here to interfere." Susan and Tom exchanged a long look, years of marriage allowing them to communicate without words. It was Susan who spoke. "Family comes in many forms," she said carefully. "If Marcus wants you in his life, then we support that. There would need to be parameters." Mrs. Keller interjected, professional concern evident. "Given the history." "Of course," Catherine agreed immediately. "I'm still attending meetings, seeing a therapist. I want to do this right, one step at a time," Tom suggested, looking at Marcus. "Maybe start with supervised visits, see how it goes?" Marcus nodded, grateful for their measured response. "I'd like that." Throughout the discussion, Chance remained by Marcus's side, occasionally shifting to press against Catherine's leg, then returning to him, a living bridge between past and present. As evening approached, arrangements were made for Catherine to return the following weekend. Contact information was exchanged, boundaries established, expectations managed. When she rose to leave, Marcus walked her to the door, Chance trailing behind them. On the porch, Catherine turned to him. "Thank you," she said simply, "for giving me a chance I don't deserve." Marcus looked down at the dog between them, the stray he'd rescued, who had somehow rescued him in return. "Maybe we all deserve second chances." Catherine's smile trembled. "Maybe we do." She hesitated, then added, "He really is remarkable, you know. Finding you, bringing us together. It's like something from that book you loved." "Chance of a lifetime," Marcus murmured. "What are the odds?" Catherine shook her head in wonder. "Of all the dogs in the world, you found one that looks exactly like your childhood pet." "1 in a million," Marcus agreed. Then after a moment's hesitation, "Same odds as finding you again, I guess." The comparison hung between them. Not quite forgiveness, but perhaps its beginning. As Catherine walked away, Marcus felt a strange sense of completion, as if a circle had closed, bringing him back to a starting point he'd never expected to revisit. Inside, the Richardsons waited with concerned expressions. "Are you okay?" Susan asked, her voice gentle. Marcus considered the question, Chance warm against his leg. "Yeah," he said, surprised by how true it felt. "I think I am." That night, as Marcus lay in bed with Chance curled beside him, he scrolled through his phone to the picture he'd taken earlier. The three of them together, himself, Catherine, and Chance. An impossible reunion made possible by a stray dog with familiar eyes. "You knew, didn't you?" he whispered to Chance, who thumped his tail against the mattress. "Somehow you knew who she was." The dog offered no explanation, but his steady presence was answer enough. Some connections transcended understanding. The bond between a boy and his dog, the invisible thread linking mother and son even across years of separation. Marcus set his phone aside and turned off the light. In the darkness, with Chance's rhythmic breathing beside him, he allowed himself to feel the weight of the day's revelations, not as a burden, but as a foundation. A new beginning built on the fragments of his past. Outside, the autumn night wrapped around the Richardson house, where a foster kid, a stray dog, and the promise of an expanding family all slept beneath one roof. The stars continued their ancient journey across the sky, witnessing one small miracle among countless others. The miracle of a second chance at family, at belonging, at home. A foster kid had saved a stray dog, never knowing it would reunite him with his birth mother. But perhaps in the greater mystery of life's interconnections, the dog had saved them both.